36 years old, made $66,000 a year as a hospital IT technician, and believed, with the quiet certainty of a man who fixed broken things for a living, that most problems could be solved with patience and the right tools. He lived in a modest, two-bedroom bungalow in Richmond's Church Hill neighborhood, a place of historic brick sidewalks and neighbors who waved as he pushed his daughter's stroller. The house, purchased for $180,000 6 years ago, was their biggest asset and his greatest source of pride. Its mortgage payments of $1,120 a month were a constant, manageable weight on his shoulders. He felt the pressure of it, but it was a good pressure, the kind that built muscle. His life was built on these manageable weights: the car payment for their 2014 Honda CR-V, the monthly contribution to their joint savings, the simple act of showing up every day for his family. But for the past year, a new, unmanageable weight had settled in his chest. It was the feeling that no matter how hard he worked, no matter how many extra shifts he picked up troubleshooting server failures at the VCU Medical Center, he was failing. He was failing his wife, Chantel. The evidence was in the small, cutting remarks that landed like stones in a quiet pond. It was in the way her eyes would scan a restaurant menu, linger on the $28 salmon, and then sigh as she ordered the $16 chicken, a silent performance of sacrifice he was meant to witness. It was in the magazines left open on their coffee table, their glossy pages showcasing $60,000 kitchen renovations and families vacationing in homes that cost more than their entire net worth. Chantel never said, "You don't make enough money." She didn't have to. She communicated it in 1,000 other ways, with the precision of a surgeon. She would talk about her friend Alicia, whose husband, a corporate lawyer, had just bought her a white BMW 3 Series, a $43,000 machine that purred with status. Chantel would describe the car's leather interior, the smooth ride, the way it made Alicia look so put together. Then she would glance out the window at their reliable, paid-off Honda, with its 112,000 miles and the faint scratch on the bumper from a grocery cart, and she would say nothing at all. The silence was louder than any accusation. Reggie was a man of logic, of systems, and processes. He believed in inputs and outputs. He was putting everything he had into their life, but the output he was receiving was a constant, low-grade hum of disappointment. He had no idea just how deep that disappointment ran, or that it had metastasized into a detailed, meticulously planned betrayal. He believed the problem was his income. He had no idea the problem was his trust. He was a good man, a simple man in the ways that mattered. He believed in the promises he made. He believed in the woman he had married. And that belief was about to cost him everything. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that the thought of them betraying you felt like a violation of the laws of physics? Let us know in the comments below and stick with us to see how one man's quiet world was about to be shattered by a single, accidental click. The facade of their domestic normalcy was built on a foundation of Reggie's quiet acts of service and Chantel's carefully curated dissatisfaction. A typical Saturday morning in their Church Hill bungalow was a tableau of manufactured peace. At 7:15 a.m., Reggie would be in the kitchen, the floorboards of the 80-year-old house creaking under his weight. He'd be making pancakes for their 4-year-old daughter, Jasmine, using the $20 griddle he'd bought at Target. Jasmine would be at the small wooden table, her bright pink pajamas a splash of color in the muted morning light, her hair a beautiful explosion of coily puffs that bounced when she laughed. She'd be coloring, the waxy smell of Crayolas filling the air. Chantel would emerge at 8:30 a.m., dressed not in pajamas, but in a $200 set of athleisure wear from Lululemon, her phone already in her hand. She wouldn't look at the pancakes or at Jasmine's drawing. Her eyes would be fixed on the screen, "Reggie, the Wi-Fi is slow again," she'd say, her voice tight. It was her standard opening line. "I can look at it after breakfast, honey," he'd reply, sliding a plate of pancakes in front of Jasmine. He'd already upgraded their internet package to the fastest one available for their area, costing them $95 a month, but it was never fast enough for Chantel. Alicia's husband had fiber optic installed. They get a gigabit connection. She says it's flawless. The comparison hung in the air, another small weight added to the pile. Reggie knew Alicia's husband's firm paid for his home internet as a business expense. He paid for theirs out of his $66,000 salary. It was a detail he didn't bother to mention anymore. He spent his weekends tending to the house. He'd patched the drywall in the hallway, a $50 DIY project that had taken him 2 full days. He'd recaulked the bathtub, spending $22 at Home Depot to stop a tiny leak. He'd planted a small garden in their tiny backyard, growing tomatoes and basil because Jasmine loved spaghetti. The cost was minimal, $30 for soil and seeds. But the effort was immense. These were his contributions, his love made tangible. Chantel saw them as evidence of their poverty. "Why don't we just hire someone?" she'd ask as he was on his hands and knees pulling weeds from the flower beds. "My dad always had a service for the lawn." Her father, a retired dentist, lived in a sprawling 5,000 square foot house in Northern Virginia with a manicured lawn that cost $400 a month to maintain. Their own lawn was a small patch of grass he mowed with a second-hand $75 mower he'd bought on Facebook Marketplace. The dollar amounts were a constant, unspoken language between them. When he bought a new pair of running shoes, a $90 pair of Asics, she would comment, "Did you really need those?" But when a package arrived for her, containing a $450 Tory Burch handbag, she would call it an investment piece. She managed their finances, a task she had insisted on taking over 2 years prior. "You're so busy with work, sweetie," she had said, her voice dripping with faux concern. "Let me handle the bills. I'm better with the details." He had agreed, relieved. He trusted her. It was his single greatest mistake. He transferred a set amount, $2,000 from his paycheck to their joint account every 2 weeks, and she handled the rest. He assumed the slow drain on their savings was due to inflation, to the rising cost of groceries, to the simple expenses of raising a child. He had no idea she was meticulously siphoning funds into a private account he didn't know existed. The life she wanted, the life she saw on Instagram and in the glossy pages of magazines, was being funded by the slow, secret erosion of the life they had built together. The West End of Richmond, with its gated communities and pristine townhomes, was a world away from their cozy, slightly worn-down Church Hill existence. For Reggie, it was a different city. For Chantel, it was a different city. For Chantel, it was the destination. And she was paving the road there with his trust, one stolen dollar at a time. The cruelty began to escalate in the 6 months leading up to the discovery. It was no longer just about size and comparisons. It became a campaign of quiet, deliberate humiliation. Each incident was a carefully placed stone, designed to wear down his confidence and reinforce her narrative that he was incompetent, that he was holding her back. The outrage accumulated in Reggie's memory, though he didn't yet understand it was a coordinated strategy. He just thought his wife was becoming meaner, more distant. One evening in March, he came home from a grueling 12-hour shift at the hospital. A network switch had failed, taking down the charting system for 3 entire floors. He had spent the day crawling under desks, running cables, and fielding panicked calls from nurses. He was exhausted, but he was also proud. He had solved the problem. He walked in the door at 8 p.m. to find Chantel dressed for a night out. She was wearing a sleek, black, $2,400 Burberry dress he'd only seen once before. "Where are you going?" he asked, his tired mind struggling to catch up. She barely looked at him, adjusting an earring in the hall mirror. "Alicia's birthday. I told you about it last week." She hadn't. "I was going to ask you to come, but, well," she gestured vaguely at his work uniform, a simple set of navy blue scrubs that cost $30 a set. The unspoken words were clear. "You wouldn't fit in." "Oh, okay. Have fun," he said, the pride from his day's work deflating like a balloon. "I left some leftover pasta in the fridge for you and Jasmine," she said, grabbing her clutch. "I have to go. The reservation is at a place in Scott's Addition. You wouldn't like it. It's very loud." It was another dismissal, another way of cordoning off her life from his. As she walked out the door, she added over her shoulder, "Don't wait up, and try to get Jasmine to bed at a reasonable hour. She was a nightmare this morning." He stood in the hallway, the smell of her expensive $180 Chanel No. 5 perfume hanging in the air, feeling less like a husband and more like the hired help. A few weeks later, they were at a neighborhood barbecue. It was a casual affair, with folding chairs and paper plates. One of their neighbors, a history professor at VCU, was asking Reggie about his job. Reggie, who was passionate about the complex systems he managed, started explaining the hospital's data redundancy protocols. He saw Chantel approaching, a plastic cup of white wine in her hand. She smiled. A tight, artificial smile that didn't reach her eyes. She placed a hand on his arm and laughed, a high, brittle sound. "Oh, don't get him started. He thinks he's saving lives, but he basically just plugs things in and tells doctors to turn their computers off and on again." She said it as if it were a charming, self-deprecating joke they shared. But the look in her eyes was pure contempt. The professor gave a polite, uncomfortable chuckle. Reggie felt the blood rush to his face. The public humiliation was dizzying. He felt small, insignificant. He looked at Chantel, who had already turned away to talk to someone else, leaving him standing there, his half-told story dying on his lips. The financial cruelty was the most insidious. In May, their property tax bill was due, a payment of $2,200. Reggie had given Chantel a check for the full amount from his personal savings account, an account he kept with a few $1,000s for emergencies. "Here," he'd said, "this should cover it." A week later, he got a delinquency notice from the city. The bill was unpaid. He confronted her that evening, the official-looking envelope in his hand. "Chantel, what happened? I gave you the check for the property taxes." She looked up from her iPad, feigning surprise. "Oh my God, I am so sorry, sweetie. I completely lost it. With everything I have to manage." She trailed off, the implication being that her life was so overwhelming, so full of important tasks, that a simple $2,000 check could easily be misplaced. "I feel terrible. We'll have to pay the late fee now." "I'll just write another one," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "You can't," she said, her expression turning to one of grave concern. "We don't have it in the joint account. I had to pay for the new tires for the Honda. They were $800, and Jasmine's preschool tuition was due." He knew for a fact the tires had been replaced 6 months ago, and he knew he had already given her money for the tuition. But in that moment, faced with her calm, concerned face, he doubted himself. He felt a wave of shame. He was failing. The late fee was another $110. It was another piece of evidence for her unstated case against him. He wasn't a capable provider. He was a man who couldn't even ensure his family's most basic bills were paid on time. He didn't know she had deposited his $2,200 check into her secret savings account the day after he gave it to her. He had no idea this was a test run for a much larger, more devastating financial disappearing act. She was testing the limits of his trust, and to her delight, she found that it had no limits at all. The final, most chilling incident happened in early June, just 2 weeks before his world would implode. They were sitting on their small front porch one evening. Jasmine was asleep inside. The air was warm and thick with the scent of honeysuckle from the neighbor's fence. It was a peaceful scene, but the tension between them was a palpable thing. "I was thinking," Reggie said, trying to bridge the ever-widening gap between them. "Maybe we could take a family vacation this summer. Just something simple. We could drive down to Virginia Beach for a few days, rent a little cottage." Chantel didn't answer for a long moment. She stared out at the street, at the cars passing by. Then she turned to him, and her face was cold, devoid of any warmth. "Virginia Beach?" she said, her voice flat. "Reggie, my friends take their kids to Turks and Caicos. They stay at resorts that cost $2,000 a night." "And you're talking about a cottage in Virginia Beach?" She shook her head, a small, pitying motion. "You just don't get it, do you? You have no ambition. You're happy in this little house, in this little life." "I'm happy with you and Jasmine," he said, his voice quiet. "I thought that was the point." She stood up, brushing off her pants, as if his words had left a residue. "The point," she said, her voice laced with a cruelty that stole his breath, "is to build something, to move up, not to stay stuck." She went inside, leaving him alone on the porch in the gathering twilight. The stars were beginning to appear, distant and cold. He sat there for a long time, the weight in his chest so heavy he could barely breathe. He knew something was deeply wrong. What he didn't know was that Chantel wasn't just dreaming of moving up. She was actively plotting to move on, and to do so, she had to make sure he was left with absolutely nothing. He was not a partner in her eyes. He was an obstacle to be removed. The discovery happened on a Tuesday. It was June 18th, a day that began with the suffocating humidity of a Richmond summer. Reggie had taken the day off work. Jasmine had woken up with a low-grade fever, and since Chantel had an important lunch meeting, he was the one who stayed home. He didn't mind. He loved these quiet days with his daughter. They spent the morning building a pillow fort in the living room and watching cartoons. By noon, Jasmine's fever had broken, and she was energetically racing her toy cars across the floor. Reggie's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter at exactly 12:33 p.m. He glanced at the screen. It was a notification for a voice memo from Chantel. He smiled, assuming it was a reminder to pick up milk or a sweet message about her day. He tapped the play button, holding the phone to his ear. The background noise was faint, the clinking of silverware, the low murmur of a restaurant. Then he heard Chantel's voice. It was not the warm, slightly strained voice he was used to. This voice was cold, sharp, and clinical. It was a voice he had never heard before. "Okay, listen carefully, Mark. I want this airtight," she began. Reggie's blood went cold. Mark? Who was Mark? The name was unfamiliar. He felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. Her voice continued, clipped and precise. "We need to move on the house first. The deed is in both our names, but I've been making the case for months that he can't afford it. I want to file a motion that forces a sale, but I want the proceeds directed to an account solely in my name, arguing that I've been the one managing the asset." A wave of nausea rolled over Reggie. The house, his house, the one he'd painted and repaired and poured his soul into. Next, the car, the 2014 CR-V. The title is also in both names. He made every single payment on that car for 5 years, but the payment came from the joint account, which I can frame as marital funds that I managed. I need you to draft a document, some kind of transfer of ownership form. I'll tell him it's for a new insurance policy to get a better rate. He'll sign it. He trusts me. Reggie's hand began to tremble. He sank into a kitchen chair, his legs suddenly unable to support him. He could hear his own heartbeat, a frantic, panicked drumming in his ears. "Most importantly," Chantel's voice went on, lower now, more conspiratorial, The school and medical records for Jasmine, I've already